starting with now when?
Correct.
Okay. Now, when I saw that I was not like to be brought forth to a public hearing and trial, though I had before answered in writing the particular matters charged against me at the time of my first examination and commitment, I was moved to send forth a paper as a public challenge to all those that did belie the truth and me behind my back, to come forth and make good their charge. And much about the same time, I writ also to the justices at Carlisle that had cast me into prison, and that persecuted friends at the instigation of the priests for tithes, expostulating the matter with them thus: Friends, Thomas Craister and Cuthbert Stagholm, your noise is come up to London. What havoc, what imprisonment is come up before the sober people? What imprisonment, what bridling, what making havoc and spoiling the goods of people have you made within these few years? Unlike men, as though you had never read scripture, to be men that minded them. Is this the end of Carlisle's religion? Is this the end of your ministry? And is this the end of your church Christianity profession? You have shamed it by your folly and madness and blind zeal. And the everlasting gospel shall be preached again, which is the power of God to all nations and kindreds and tongues in this the Lamb's day, which you shall appear before to judgment, and you have no way to escape. The first and the last, the beginning and the ending, the Alpha and Omega. He hath appeared that was dead, is alive again, and lives for evermore. I mentioned before that Gervase Benson and Anthony Pearson, though they had been justices of the peace, were not permitted to come to me in the prison, whereupon they jointly wrote a letter to the magistrates, priests, and people at Carlisle concerning my imprisonment.
Thank you, Sheila.
Okay.
Let's hear from Bev.
Thank you. What's important to me in this is when Fox says, I was moved. I can't find the spot. I'm having a hard time seeing. I wrote, I was moved to send forth a paper. So this issue of being moved to speak or to communicate, and where that comes from, and what he did, what he was doing before that. I remember in a past passage, it really evoked something in me when he was walking in the fields all night. So he was doing something in prison before that happened. And I would really like to understand what being moved means. Because this relates to when people are speaking in a meeting or even in discussion, where is that communication coming from? And the letter to me is being moved like the protective mother, that side of not calm and peaceful, but I don't want you to touch the stove. I'm going to protect you. Like this strength that's come through him to speak those words to those people.
Thank you, Bev. And let's hear from Elise.
Well, the part in this reading that really struck my heart is where he is writing to Thomas and Cuthbert, I guess, where he says, and he says it to us. So this is what I hear. When I'm reading in the Bible and I'm reading Paul's letters, I hear him speaking to me. And I hear this letter speaking to me and to us, those gathered here, where he says, the everlasting gospel shall be preached again, which is the power of God to all nations and kindreds and tongues. Well, we don't do this. And that is the key. That is the thing. That's the key thing that is being asked, that the everlasting gospel be preached again, which is the power of God. I guess that's all I want to say about it.
Could you might illuminate a bit on what the everlasting gospel is for you?
I understand the everlasting gospel to be what George Fox realized early in his seeking, that where he says, Christ has come to teach his people himself. So that is my understanding of the everlasting gospel. And a lot of other stuff has been to it, so much so that it is smothered in today's world. That key understanding, that foundational understanding, is pretty much ignored in my experience.
I'm still trying to come into a full definition of the everlasting gospel for me. For me, I think that Jesus is the embodiment of that gospel in everything he says and everything he does. Currently, not just in the past, and that he lives at the center of our being, and we can know and experience him and be moved by him. And it's something that is at the same time part of us, and at the same time something that is distinct from us, that moves us. It's different than our own thoughts, emotions, wisdom, intelligence. It's that of God within us that we can experience and be transformed by, and be moved by, and be enlightened by. And this goodness is so infinite that I would choose to have that goodness instead of anything that I could produce on my own, through my own willpower. And that's, the definition that of religion that I use that might be different than other people. Religion is always trying to get us to try and perform in our own strength, to resist what is wrong in our own strength, and to love in our own strength. David's not here, but he loved me saying, it's not our job to wrestle our hearts into loving other people. I believe that that is the function of that of God within us, but it is our responsibility to bring our hearts to that light that shows us what is love and what is not love. even within us. And that when we're moved by that power of infinite wisdom, good things result. Not that everybody receives it. As we know from reading the journal, Fox and friends do get a lot of abuse from religious people, just like Jesus did, just like the prophets did before that. And when this ultimate power of goodness moves through us, there seems to be this response from evil, that which has called itself good and godly, but isn't really based in what God can do in us, is based on our own efforts and opinions and intelligence instead of that infinite. And we see that even here, where religion and religious people raise themselves up against what the friends were doing, specifically George Fox. And they do all kinds of evil physical tortures, make up lies about the Quakers and Fox. And at one point I used to wonder why there were so many books against Quakers, and here I see that Fox actually challenges them to put it in writing so that he can refute it, and so friends can refute the lies that they make up about Quakers. And they seem, in their persecution of the friends, they seem quite willing to make up any kind of lie, make up any kind of saying. Some of it might be just because of their confusion. But he notes the difference between friends would never physically persecute anyone because they believe there's that of God in everyone. And what you do to the least of these, you're doing directly to Jesus. And so they live by the spirit that takes away all of that. Madeline?
Thank you. Yeah, there's so much of interest in that sentence. Thank you very much, Elise. It does remind me of something that apparently St. Francis said to his followers. He sent them out saying, "Go and preach the gospel to all creatures and use words only when necessary." So not to say that there aren't gifted vocal ministers, and boy, do we need them. But for many of us, it is really perhaps our preaching is what others can see in the fruits of the Spirit, in our actions and our tenderness towards others.
And I would even say that the fruit of spirit are all infinite in quality and quantity, because they're the fruit of the Spirit, not the fruit of us trying harder. It's what the Spirit produces within us. Bev?
I also find this passage, I don't know if uplifting is the right word, and I don't know what the right word is. It makes me feel, I don't know, connected to everything and everyone. When he says, well, to me, the gospel in whatever form, in whatever culture, is revelation, is that connection to the divine. And he talks about all nations and kindreds and tongues. And it just makes me think that, you know, at all times through history, in all places, in all cultures, we all have the opportunity to practice and receive the same truth in different ways. And it just makes me feel really good to know that it's there for everyone in whatever way, in whatever place we're at, because our bodies, our minds, our emotions are particular to the physical, to where we are at that time, our language. But the truth that comes through revelation is the same for everyone, and we're all connected that way. And it's I wish I could come up with another word than uplifting, but that's all I can think of right now.
Lynn?
There's a discernment process that is needed in each of us to understand whether we're speaking or acting from self, or whether something is moving through us. And I think the word discipline comes to mind, which is not a modern word, but a word that was used when I first got involved with Quakers. The discipline of discerning whether you were acting from self or speaking from self. It is when you're ministering, you don't want to do that. You don't want to speak from self. If you wish to share the workings of the inner Christ together, it's your commitment to set self aside and listen. I'd like us to talk more about this process of discernment, because I don't hear it discussed often amongst Quakers. I get more the sense of, well, God can speak through anyone. And that's not really it. It's a practice that if we practice it together, can take us to extraordinary places together as the Spirit moves amongst us. And if we don't practice that together, we bob up to the surface quite easily, I think. So I'd put this out that I'd like to hear us talk more about that process of discernment, of knowing when we're standing in the light and something is being given to us. Myself, I feel fairly comfortable. I don't think I'm given insight or things to say very often, but I think I know when that happens, and I can't describe it. But I try to be faithful to it and loyal to it when it does happen. So thank you.
Maybe that can be our after discussion on discernment, because it is kind of a bigger topic than just what's here in the text. For a short answer, I'd give definitely the fruit of the Spirit in infinite quality and quantity as tests for anything that we might need to test what's rising up within us. Also, wisdom that is greater than our own. And that's been a couple of my tests, although I don't. Some people have the gift of discernment and they kind of know when God is speaking to them without having a lot of doubt about it, but that is unfortunately not as popular as it could be. Welcome to Jack Smith, who has joined us. Even if you're a new person, you are fully free to add to the discussion. Are we ready
there
to
any-
go? Go ahead.
Shadow, you and I are of the same mind. Just checking any further comments or discussion on this section before we move on. Okay, hearing none. Lynn, I'm wondering if you're in a position of starting to read for the section 189.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And whilst I was in the dungeon, a little boy, one James Parnell, about 15 years old, came to me, and he was convinced and came to be a very fine minister of the word of life, and turned many to Christ. At last he was imprisoned himself in Colchester, and the jailer was cruel with him and made him climb up and down for his victuals into a place called Little Ease, or the oven, where they kept him. And he fell down, the rope breaking, and broke his head so as he died. And then the wicked independent priests made a book of it and said he fasted himself to death, which was all lies.
Thank you, Lynn. What stands out for me in this section is how Fox has such a tremendous memory, considering how many years after many of these events that he writes. And he remembers this young boy, he remembers his name. And I had a sense as Lynn read about the boy dying that there was some, I'm not sure what the word is, but a sense of maybe I'll say gentleness, because he died in the faith, and that was there, that despite this book that was written about him, that element was there. I'm also somewhat intrigued by the comment that he came to be a fine minister of the word. And I wonder just about the time frame here, because the way I read this, it seems like he died when he was 15. But maybe that means he was a minister as a very young boy of 15, or maybe this was a little bit of a time shifting here. Let's hear from Madeline. Oh, sorry.
It is a bit of a time shift. I don't think he lived to 20 though.
I have a little write-up about him in front of me from Friends Library. And it says his dates were 1637 to 1656. So he died at 19. He is said to have been young, small of stature, and poor in appearance, but thousands were obliged to confess that he spoke as one having authority and not as the scribes. He was convinced of the truth when a boy of 14 years and became a valiant minister of the gospel by 16. Following a debate with a prominent priest, Parnell was arrested on spurious charges of being, quote, an idle and disorderly person, unquote, and imprisoned at Colchester Castle. There he was confined to a small hole in the thick castle wall, 12 feet above the ground, and died from sickness and ill treatment after 10 months imprisonment at 19 years of age.
That's so helpful, Madeline. Thank you so much. Let's hear from Bev.
I'm not quite sure how to word this, but as I change, I see the suffering of others differently. In the past, I would be very angry and think it's very unjust. And I still think that, but I don't feel that. I kind of feel real joy for him having found his way. And then the suffering that happens to each person is just the way of the world. But that he had that change, I guess I see it for myself as well, is such a blessing. So, I don't feel like saying, oh, those terrible people, or, they're all suffering and that's their actions. So I don't know if I've explained that well enough, but there's kind of a joy there for what he has received and what he was able to be in this life. And the suffering is just the way of the world for all of us.
Yin Chen?
Yeah, excuse me. I want to clarify if it's the English. I don't understand why that here the first line of second paragraph that at least he was imprisoned himself in Colchester. Does it mean he put himself in jail himself, or somebody put him in the prison alone in a cell. So the subject, who put him into the prison? Someone or himself?
Yeah, yeah. The authorities put him in jail. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
What was Bev saying? Oh yes, there is an empowerment given by some people, by God, to endure suffering for righteousness' sake. It's mentioned in the Bible, even in the Beatitudes. Blessed are those. And joy, great joy is what they experience. There are people who are around the world today are suffering for their faith, and they report a great joy. And they don't pray for an end of their suffering, because they see that God uses it to produce something very good within them. Maybe even a purity that they would not have striven for to receive from God on their own without that persecution. And God is certainly a miracle worker that can turn even evil things that happen to us and use them for our blessing and our good and our upbuilding. It's very easy to form attachment to our culture and be informed and ruled by what our culture thinks is good and right, which may very much differ from what the infinite goodness of the divine thinks is good. Here we see English British culture at this time greatly mistreating prisoners of all kinds for all kinds of reasons. And Quakers to this day work for prison reform because they believe there's that of God in everyone, and so that everyone deserves that infinite respect and shouldn't be treated inhumanely, even if they've done wrong. But here we see the Quakers and the Friends being imprisoned not because they did wrong, but because they did right by God's standards, but maybe not by religion's standards. Again, religion as I define it might be different than how you define it. Jenny?
Somebody in our meeting, Joe Bellicott, wrote about conscientious objectors and how they were punished. Many of them went to war, and many of them suffered a lot. Many of them broke under that for various reasons. But she said some of them became conscientious objectors because of a group identity or peer pressure. Some of them because of an inner revelation or conviction. And she postulates that those who were conscientious objectors because of a very personal, deep conviction managed to survive because of that. So there must have been something there that kept them hanging on.
As we see here with Friends, being motivated by that divine spirit within them, they're quite willing to endure these persecutions. and find joy in it at times. In a section coming up, Fox is singing as they beat him because he's moved by the Spirit of God to do so. It wasn't his own idea. Some are definitely called for that, and some are definitely empowered in that. And so we might think ourselves, as I have in the past, how much suffering could I endure? I'm just a human being like everybody else. And if I'm suffering for my own strength, I don't think I'm very strong that way. But if it should come to pass, I expect the empowerment of God to see me through it. Not necessarily to take away all the pain, just give me that inward fortitude that comes from God, that grace empowerment that empowers us to stay with the truth, capital T, truth, in what he wants in us and for us. And a lot of the Beatitudes don't really make a lot of sense unless you factor in God inwardly empowering us. And that's turning to him. Anything further from this section? In this section, meat means food. This doesn't just mean meat. There's lots of words from 17th century that are words we use today, but they have a different meaning and usage, or multiple meanings and usages.
Shadow, do you mean in the 189 section or in the 190?
190.
190. Okay, very good. Ginny, would you be in a position to read the section 190?
Certainly.
Great, thank you.
But I continued in the dungeon amongst the prisoners, and the little parliament, hearing that a young man was to die for religion at Carlisle, they writ down to the sheriff and magistrates. But it came after I was set at liberty. But the jailer continued so exceedingly cruel that he beat friends and friendly people that did but come to the window to look in upon me exceedingly with great cudgels, as if he had been beating a pack of wool. And I could get up to the grate, where sometimes I took my meat. And the jailer was offended and came in a rage with his great staff. And he fell a beating of me, though I was not at the window at that time, and cried, "Come out of the window," though I was far enough off it. And as he struck me, I was made to sing in the Lord's power, and that made him rage the more. Then he fetched a fiddler and brought him into the dungeon and set him to play, thinking to cross me. And when he played, I was moved in the everlasting power of the Lord God to sing, and my voice drowned them and struck them and confounded them and made the fiddler sigh and give over his fiddling. And so he passed away with shame.
Thank you, Ginny.
Yeah, so give over means he gave up playing. Passed away didn't mean he died, just means he left. In our extra notes, I do have a 1-page notes about different word usage, but you'd probably need a whole book to describe all of them.
Let's hear from Bev.
The image that came to mind when he was talking about the jailer is an abusive parent. And it's the realization that that jailer is suffering, and how the goodness in another person stirs up that suffering to bring on that abuse. And you know, if children had the ability to have the power that Fox had in that situation to deal with it, I think it's a lesson in dealing with other people's reactions to, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. But I think it's a great lesson. And it has nothing to do with what his body is going through. It has to do with staying with I don't know. It's very moving.
Let's hear from Yun Chan.
Thank you. What I'm thinking is, let me collect my mind. When I read this just now, I'm wondering how this person would do this kind of beating. He was not, I don't know what kind of order he got from the judge or whoever who had authority to put Fox in jail. He seemed just, he acted very, very cruel to Fox. Now, I am thinking, in modern words, he internalized the dominance value that this prisoner is evil, is wrong, so I have to discipline him no matter what. I am doing something just to punish him whatever I can. So this is how he looked at his own duty. He internalized the dominance. So it gives me empathy at this moment to those people that I know very well, my good friends who are leading in church, in the religion, that they are oppressing people who are in my minority. I think it is important because I have authority from the Bible. I have the God give me the mission to uphold what is right and wrong here in this church, the religious institution. So I am asking God to continue to give me this empathy, to look at them in this perspective, and ask God to give me more wisdom, spiritual wisdom, to look at that. This is how I want to share.
Thank you. And let's hear from Madeline.
I'm struck by the singing. I'm struck by the whole story. But Fox was not the only martyr who sang under persecution and even as they were dying. It's as though we have within us a channel through which the Lord can operate. Some people at least have the possibility of so opening themselves that God's manifested in God's glory is manifested in this way.
Yeah, in the Bible, the apostles were beaten or whipped for preaching Jesus' name, and they counted it for pure joy. Paul, maybe it was Paul and Silas, were in jail at one point, and they were singing songs of praise to God at midnight. And some miraculous things happened there with that. It's not everyone, but that potential, that fruit of the spirit of joy, despite our circumstances, and peace, despite our circumstances, even in the face of persecution, is a very real possibility. And it's very buttressed by the knowledge, the experiential knowledge that we are moving in the Spirit's will and guidance and motion. And Jesus said even to expect persecution if you're going to be moved by the same Spirit that he was moved by. That the student is not above the master, that what they did to him, they will do to you. But again, it's a price that is joyfully and willingly accepted, because you know within you that the world is so wrong in a certain way, in going a certain way, that it requires a sacrifice to bring it right. And that Spirit of God propels you, infuses you. Lots of early friends, yep, definitely were persecuted. Lots of early Christians were persecuted as they moved in the Spirit. A different Fox, John Fox's book of Martyrs, with Fox with an E on the end, details a few of the ways that early Christians who were moving in the Spirit and how they were persecuted and tortured to death, martyred, just like Jesus, just like the prophets. When infinite good moves through us, that which pretended to be good rises up in opposition, in persecution, in force, in coercion of anything that's different than them. And within ourselves, there is that tendency to that we ourselves need to be rescued from that inner tendency to persecute that which is different. But what God engenders in us is an acceptance of all this infinite variety that God produces, a goodwill towards all humans, towards all creation. But if we're not rescued from that human tendency within us, we would act just the same. And maybe we have. And maybe I do. And that's why we need that motion of the divine within us to free us even from that, our own inner tendencies towards persecuting the different. Even when we're different, it still crops up as society's programming of our own fallen nature. Elise?
This jailer's horrific behavior so strongly brings to my mind the corrupting influence of power. And just like Chado was mentioning just now, I think we really don't know how we would behave in certain circumstances. And that I don't think any of us would behave the way the jailer's behaving. But people are drawn to these positions, and this is it's true today. It's probably happening today. It's probably happening right now, somewhere in the world, maybe in this country, maybe somewhere else. People are drawn to these positions because they have a great yearning for power. And the people that are drawn to them are probably the very ones who should not have them. So how to have people in these positions, which are needed to have some control, to have some society in good order. But the people who are in those positions should not be those that crave power. We see this politically as well as just amongst people who are today police officers. So the very people who are given these and who have been given these positions of power, they have some big hollowness in them that wants to be filled up by expressing this, by hurting other people. So it's a very sad thing. And I look at it more deeply than just thinking this individual man and what he did, because there's a soul sickness that this comes from. And he is just one example of millions.
Yes, we note in this circumstance that this is a collusion between the judges, the magistrates, the jailers, the religious bigwigs that come and argue and try and dissuade Fox, and the great ladies that come and just want to mock him and dissuade him. So this is a society-wide collusion that is all, if they don't know the degree of what he is suffering, all think that he deserves suffering because he's preaching something different than the way that they were raised in as to what is right and what is wrong and what is God's way. And I can have some compassion on them because they were raised in a system that they thought this was the one right way, that was God's way. And so it is quite disturbing when somebody comes and says, no, that's not God's way, that's actually the devil's way. And says the God's way is to know him directly and be led by his righteousness within and not follow a system a religious system, a hierarchy, paid ministries, and so on and so on. It is disconcerting if that's what you've been raised in. And the whole system of coercion and punishment of anybody different seems right and good from the eyes and the perspective of that system. But God thinks differently. Can we go to Ginny next, Bev? We'll do you after Ginny. Just give people who haven't spoken much more time and more first place.
Yeah, I'm reminded of what Jesus said, forgive them for they know not what they do. And of course, it's easy to be angry. But if we could get there where we can forgive, and perhaps forgive ourselves too for being part of it at times, maybe that's the beginning of doing something about it. But I'm also thinking about how I'm moved by the power of Fox to endure the suffering and to do what he did. But he was human. I'm not quite sure he achieved that sense of forgiveness that we had the example of on the cross.
Good question. Bev?
I was thinking about the singing, and when I view the way we are as humans now through the eyes of someone who's doing internal family systems, and that there is no evil in us, but we're burdened because of the society we live in. We're burdened from conception. And for me, the singing is what's coming through from the divine and coming through Fox to touch the self or the soul or the heart of the jailer. It's meant for the jailer. But if a person isn't open to receiving, things synchronistically happen in front of me all the time. I never saw it before, but now I see it. So we're given so much all the time. We have the ability to receive all the time from the divine, but our eyes are not open or our hearts are not open. It's like the singing is the word coming from the divine to the jailer, and maybe it'll touch some part and it'll become aware in him at some other time. Maybe it won't touch him, but the divine is always giving, is always giving, is always giving. So the possibility is there. And I really feel like Fox has that awareness in him of others. To me, it's like an elder. Elders in the Indigenous community, I pick up when I am in their presence, they don't have animosity towards individuals. They have a deep understanding of what has happened. And it's that sense of no one is bad. It's just we're all acting out our burdens all the time. And I guess there's hope in if we can hear or feel what comes through nature or through another person like Fox. I guess again, I feel very hopeful. And it's very strange, but I feel very hopeful from what Fox has said here.
Earlier in the journal, Fox was being stoned by a friend's wife, but later she became convinced and great friends, I think, with Fox. He definitely does seem to delight in when God cuts somebody off, as he calls it. They die in some horrible way, as he sees it, for punishment for what they've done to friends. But he's careful not to wish it himself, I think.
No.
When the authorities come, like all these jailers and these judges and stuff, they're doing things illegally. He could easily bring them up on charges and have them disbarred and put in jail themselves, maybe, because they're just doing everything illegally anyway. But he never pursues that legal justice. He leaves it to God. But when he sees them die horribly or suffer some kind of judgment afterwards, when they haven't repented, he does seem to delight in that. But I think maybe he'd rather they repent and come to God and know the truth and be convinced and walk in the truth than suffer that fate. And he seems to he tirelessly puts effort into speaking that of God towards them. And even maybe this song, it's a witness not just to the jailer, but to the other people there and to George Fox himself, to see the power of God move through him in that way. It's a testimony of something miraculous happening, and that we need not be afraid, that we can take even our own traumas to God, unhealed traumas, to find healing. And that God despises no one who comes to him and rejects no one who comes to him, and even criticizes in some ways those who come to him. It's not about beating us up for our wrongs. It's about delivering us into a better way of love.
We have one more section, 191, and then we would be finished chapter 7. Should we try for that today? I'm seeing a few head nods. Everyone okay with that? All right. I will read. And the governor and Justice Anthony Pearson came down, and it was such an ill savor and a shame to the magistrates that the jailer should do such things, that they called for the jailers into the dungeon. And they came down into the dungeon to me, and they bid the jailers find sureties for the good behavior. And so they put the under jailer into the dungeon with me, amongst the moss troopers, who had been such a cruel fellow. So after a while, I was set at liberty by the justices, and the Lord's power came over them all. And the Lord cut off 2 of those persecuting justices at Carlisle, and the other, after a time, was turned out of his place and went out of the town. Let's hear from Bev. You're muted.
Thank you, Donna. I think that when I am cruel or doing some harmful action or speech, that it's always to ease my suffering. And I feel like that's what the jailer was doing too. And Fox doesn't have any, well, I don't feel like he's, well, thank goodness the guy got his comeuppance. I don't think it's that. It's that, you know, your actions have repercussions on yourself and on others. But I don't think he feels, I don't think it gives him joy. I don't know if it's the same, but my sense is that people doing bad things is not because they're bad. It's because those actions, you know, whether it's addictive behavior or others, is to ease the suffering. Because we haven't learned the way of actually healing by being with spirit.
Chen Yun? Yun Chen, sorry.
Yes, thank you. I'm still thinking, contemplating on Pina's question. We are human beings. How can we suffer such cruel treatment? Physically, the pain is unbearable for me. I mean, like this few months, I'm thinking of advanced care planning, and I learned if I have pain so terribly or whatever situation, I will stop eating, stop drinking for a week, and then I will die. You don't have to suffer that much. So that kind of thinking plan come to me. And at this moment, when we are reading and when I'm thinking of Tina's question, I remember that in the letter written by Paul, he suffered a lot, so many times through treatment. And he said, this is a short-term suffering in comparing with the long-term joy, the glory of God, and so on. And this is only short-term. And when we read the Holocaust, people who witness and who told their stories, or so many incredible stories, I cannot imagine how people can suffer. That human being in such bad situation can have such strength, endure suffering that I cannot imagine. So I can only say, I also practice a little, right? In my life, daily life, when I am in pain or when I feel, we all have this experience that I'm thinking after that, I will have good life, something like that. Well, Chinese medicine is very bitter, when we drink the bitter, after 1 week, 2 weeks or so, and imagine when I get better, oh, that's the good thing that I can get back. I can play with my grandson again. So this is a simple what I'm practicing. So that helped me to endure temporary suffering. So this is, I think everybody has this kind of experience. It helps me at this moment.
Thank you, Yan Chun. And let's go to Madeline.
I am still meditating on what Bev said, and I guess the question of what is the root of evil. And I'm thinking back to times that I've done things for which I've had to repent. And I don't think it's just the burden of suffering, although I think I was psychologically not very healthy when I did those things. But there was also a sort of egotistical willfulness that said, I don't have, that still small voice was there, but I was saying, I don't have to listen to you because I have this very sophisticated understanding of the world and how this is really okay to do. So there's a lot of twisted skeins in there.
We find ways to justify our behavior and reasons, but they're false. But it takes real courage to face the light and the truth. And I think the more that we are healed and do come to the light, the more we're empowered to face even more truth. But God doesn't often, just dump on us all the things that we're doing wrong and not doing everything according to love. He works with us. And he brings us along step by step. And faith, even like a mustard seed, he works with, but he's always looking to grow it. And maybe we get to the point where we love any kind of correction that he brings because we want to move in the ways of love instead of the ways of egotism or selfishness. And maybe we're empowered to co-suffer with others who are being persecuted for their sake. I'm not sure if it was here earlier or next coming up, but Justice Benson's wife determines that she'll only eat what she eats with George Fox, and otherwise will share in the suffering that he is suffering as far as food goes. There's something about the co-suffering love of God. And I think about this often, about if Jesus was in heaven, in the perfect place, perfect joy, and yet he came to endure existence, this world that we have made and messed up, to co-suffer with us. That takes a lot of courage. If I see somebody being persecuted, will I stand in between? Will I take the blows upon my own body? Will I not react and retaliate hate for hate, but stay centered in God's peace and love and joy? Because it's beyond my own ability, I know. But that is the empowerment of God that we sometimes seek and sometimes we run away from, because nobody likes suffering. But that is part of the empowerment, and that is part of what's needed to set the world right. That someone would be willing to suffer for righteousness' sake, for God's sake, all the way down to torture, all the way down to death. But we see that God is a redeemer. So Saul, who participated in the persecution of early Christians and got papers so that he could take away their goods and put them in jail and eventually kill them or stone them. He who persecuted the church became a sufferer for Jesus to set the world right. And God used him mightily. God redeemed him. And so nothing is beyond God's redemption in us if we become willing, if we're willing to be made willing even. And so there's sometimes I think when God calls me to do something and I don't really want to do it. So I bring that to God. I don't really want to do this. And I wait in him until he gives me the willingness to do it, and his heart to do it, and his love to do it, to overcome any kind of resistance, including fear, including just selfishness or laziness or XYZ, right? It's that empowerment that comes from God that changes everything. That purifies even myself. And empowers me to do things like God would do, like Jesus did, like Fox and early friends are doing, like the prophets did, like the early Christians did. They aren't finding the power in their own self, their own willpower, or their own wisdom, their own idea of, oh, I'm going to sing when this guy's beating me, so that's how I'll overcome. It might work, actually, in a lot of cases, but it only goes so far. But the power of God is inexhaustible and enduring. and bigger than any human being or situation. And so Jesus says, take heart in me, I have overcome the world.